Hello and welcome to Aging Insights. Today we have a distinguished panel to talk about understanding cannabis and integrating education and accessibility into health and wellness programs. Our panel today is Angela Speakman from Stockton University, Dr. Alan Au from Vigor Dispensary, Dr. Marianne Bays from Northeast Corridor Provisions, and Dr. Anna Schwabe from the University of Colorado. Thank you for joining us and welcome today. We're glad that you can be here. Let's just start off this conversation. Anna, if you could tell us, what do we mean by cannabis? What is it exactly that we're talking about?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it's somewhat complex. So cannabis is a plant, right? It's one species of plant that has been used for, anywhere from 6 to 10,000 years by humans, grown, cultivated for lots of different things, for fiber, for medicine, for fuel, all kinds of stuff. Currently, most people, especially this audience, we're talking about cannabis. We're going to be talking about the flower that comes from the cannabis plant, specifically the female cannabis plant, that is used for the phytochemicals that are produced in that flower. Hemp is also cannabis, the plant. And
Okay.
so when you say cannabis in this sort of context, you're actually talking about that flower that is then going to be consumed in a multitude of different ways. So a lot of people think cannabis, they think marijuana, they think smoking it out of, potentially a pipe or in a joint. But there's lots of other ways that cannabis can be consumed, including, things like gummies or tinctures or patches, lotions, things like that. So it's much more broad than that. But for for this talk, that's all we really need to know, is that we're talking about the phytochemicals that come from that plant.
Thank you. And can you please, each of you, tell us about your work and the importance of educating and integrating information on cannabis into health and wellness? Angela, can we start with you?
Absolutely. And so happy to be here. Thanks, Kathy. We really appreciate it. So I am very proud of being a member of the teaching staff at Stockton University in their hemp and cannabis business management undergraduate program. And Stockton has really been a pioneer in not only the state, but across the country, because not many universities have programs that are designed around this budding industry, and the pun opportunities are endless. And this is coming from developing not only a minor program, which launched somewhere around 2018, 2019, but also a community education program. So they had a certification program that was accessible to everyone. And education is really a pressing need as this industry and state by state legalization really continues to take hold across the country, because we need trained workforce. We need professionals that are able to positively contribute. And when you think about how many challenges exist from, over a century of prohibition, problematic information, like barriers to being able to study, we need lots of good education. And in addition to my work with Stockton, I actually own an education agency that helps people make informed decisions. That's called Elucidation Strategies, because we really need focused education that's structured out of, university and organized education initiatives. But we also need public cannabis education initiatives too, that help members of the public access good, reliable information so that they can make informed and safe decisions. And I'm not just talking about consumption. There's policy and regulation decisions, and
Right.
all of the health and wellness component, that all the umbrella that exists. We need access to that. So I'm really proud to be a contributor when it comes to education in the state of New Jersey.
Thank you. And Anna, can you tell us how this affects your work and what you do?
Yeah, so I started out, learning more than I ever thought I'd know about cannabis. In 2015, Colorado, which is where I moved from to New Jersey from Colorado. Colorado voted for adult use cannabis in 2012.
Hmm.
And I noticed there were lots of questions. So I'm by trade a population geneticist. Questions like, how come when I go to different dispensaries but buy the same thing, they don't do this, they don't have the same effects? And I thought that was very interesting because, you know, when you go to the store and you buy a Snickers bar, it doesn't matter if it's 7-Eleven or, you
Hmm.
know, even Australia, like it's going to be there's a level of expectation of what that Snickers bar is going to
Right.
be.
There's
And
consistency.
yeah, and that seemed not to be the case in cannabis. And so that's where my interest started, is what's going on. Because as Angela mentioned, there's been about 100 years of prohibition, which has basically cut out scientific investigation on the plant. We haven't been able to grow it. We haven't been able to study it. You know, has a long history of illicit growing and underground
Mhm.
trading and things like that. And so really what I found was it's kind of a mess in terms of being able to identify and actually reliably get what you think you're getting. And so that's where my work started. So I am a plant biologist by trade, and that's really where my interest lies. But all of my research has been consumer driven. So, what is the consumer getting on the other side of the counter? What are they getting in their hands, and what are they putting into their body? And how does the science back that up? And what consumers should know about what's going on in the industry so that they can make informed decisions based on what, you know, I have found out and the other people are finding out as well. And so I feel like it's my job as a science communicator and educator to, yeah, inform everybody, whether they're in this industry, whether they are a consumer, whether they're just kind of curious, whether they, you know, want to put some cannabis in their garden, for example. You know, there's basic information about the plant that we just haven't known, that we know about lots of other plants, tomatoes and corn and cotton and, you know, all those things. We know tons of information, and we just don't have it for cannabis. And for such an important economical and personal plant that we've been utilizing for 10,000 years, we should know a lot more about it. So that's my role in the cannabis space.
That's really fascinating. And Alan, can you tell us about your work and how it applies?
Sure. So my name is Dr. Alan Allen. I'm a registered pharmacist. I've retail is my background. So I've been a retail pharmacist for almost 20, or not 20 years, but almost 20 years. But uh, I started my journey out in the healthcare space, dealing with the customer, dealing with the patient. And really, I discovered cannabis late in my life and just really understanding why there was no science because of the prohibition and learning about the
Uh,
history and all of that really intrigued me to figure it out, right? Like I never learned about cannabis in pharmacy school. That was something that was never taught to me outside of a class called drugs and toxicology. So, learning the medicinal benefits and working firsthand alongside patients to see how it benefits them, it's fascinating, absolutely
yeah.
fascinating. And, you know, seniors are one of the largest growing demographics here that are benefiting from the plant. And so, beyond the clinical research that everyone is used to in the traditional medical pharma world, I'm taking the approach where I'm hand-holding customers on the ground level, right? They're the ones that
Mhm.
are actually benefiting from the plant. So while the research and science figures itself out, I'm still going to do my best to use all the tools in my arsenal to help the patient on the ground floor. So
Great.
I'm the CEO of Vigor Dispensary. We're an adult use cannabis dispensary that's going to be focused on health and wellness. We're opening in Matawan, New Jersey in the next couple months, so look out for us.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least, Marianne, can you tell us about your work and how this overlaps or impacts it?
Cannabis was in the headlines in New Jersey because they were beginning to press for medical use legalization. And so I got involved at that point, learning about it. I mean, I found the Coalition for Medical Marijuana in New Jersey, which had been operating for at least a decade before that, and is founded by a nurse, Ken Wolski is the executive director. And he has, built an organization that was all about educating people about the medical use of cannabis and the needs of that community and what sensible legislation would look like. So I learned a great deal that way. So when I look at the senior population, And in working with my own parents at the end of their lives, I'm hoping I can give you some examples of this later and the needs that I see that exist around it. But I'm currently on the MBA advisory board at Rowan University, and I just made touch with their medical school because I think that's the best place for this education to exist, where people learn about the plant and its medicinal benefits. Now, we say there's not enough research, but one other thing that I learned from the nurses and the physicians that they associated with was there's plenty of research. It just wasn't done here.
Oh,
And if
that's
we ignore
interesting.
international research, we're being ridiculous.
Hmm.
So there's a conference that I've been to a couple of times called Patients Out of Time. That is an international cannabis research forum for doctors and nurses, people in the health profession. It's something that I wish, more people knew about and took advantage of. Um, so I'm passionate about the implementation of sensible cannabis programs. I get to work with both the companies that are trying to set up and with the Cannabis Regulatory Commission and with lobbyists too. And so I do see a lot of different sides of the issues that we face. But I think that there's such a huge need in this area. And I think we can all get behind it. I think that we all have parents or we ourselves are seniors and we understand that introducing someone to a topical that's going to be able to be rubbed on their knee and is going to relieve their pain is something that we should be able to do. And we need to find more ways to educate people. I find that most people don't even know that you could rub a cannabis cream on you, that one exists. No. So
And it sounds like with with your experience and history that it's not just if it were a drug that were being introduced, there's a business strategy. It's set up. There's a way to introduce
a
a
path to
drug for
market
something.
and education you're required to give.
Hmm.
Yes, of course, there's all other things like drug
Yeah.
salesmen,
But
but
you've had to do so much more for cannabis to even begin to start the industry, to start the use, and to start the education.
and you're so limited in
Hmm.
the paths that you're allowed to use to educate uh,
Okay.
and to work with the public. We're currently working on the issue of samples being used in the industry.
Hmm.
Now, in any other industry, this wouldn't be a question.
Oh,
You'd
right,
be able
right,
to give a sample of your liquor, in the liquor store. You pour little cups to the customers freely, no big deal.
right.
But it's a big deal in this industry because we act like every little morsel of it is dangerous.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of this, we need to look back at the history of this. And Alan, can you retrace for us the history of legislation in New Jersey, how it came about and the process?
Yeah, legal cannabis has been around New Jersey since 2010. John Corzine's last kind of initiative was to implement this, and it kind of sat dormant for a number of years until about 2018 when Governor Murphy passed Executive Order 6 expanding the program. So when the program launched originally, it was medical only. You needed to get a card. There were specific debilitating medical conditions,
Right.
things like ALS, multiple sclerosis, terminal cancer. And so it wasn't until 2018 when Governor Murphy opened up the program to include conditions like anxiety and chronic pain. And that really shifted the gears. We went from about 20,000 medical patients to almost over 100,000 patients within the span of 2 years. And so It was thriving all the way until 2020, when public question number one was on the ballot of do you want to support legalization? Overwhelmingly, 67% of New Jerseyans voted yes in support of it, and the rest is history. It took a while for, the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Commission to get established. Licensing is still a very difficult part of that conversation with operators like myself. Like we've been trying to open our store for almost 3 years now, and we're
Oh,
almost there. But yeah, it's been fantastic as far as seeing the market grow and thrive. And with that, there's different product types, different form factors, and different, business owners that really have a passion for the plant, which it's unlike any other industry. A lot of CPG industries are just producing a product to consume, but there's really a ties to the culture of cannabis, and finding those owners and operators that support the same mission. That's one of our goals.
okay. And Marianne, are you concerned at all about with changing federal policies at multiple levels? Are you concerned that the current climate at the federal level will change or impact this legislation that New Jersey has?
You always have to have a concern of what impact of the impact of things that happen on the federal level on the states. But from the beginning of this, I've seen that the action happens when it happens, so very slowly and quietly, that it's not worth betting on.
Okay.
Instead, what we need to do is focus on what we're doing state by state. And I
Okay.
think that eventually what will happen will be much like alcohol legalization, which was state by state.
Oh, really?
With
Okay, I didn't know that.
oh yeah, because some states said no. Okay, and so I think we'll end up with a patchwork of different state laws,
Hmm.
kind of with superseded by a federal tax. I mean, a structure so that there will be federal tax. And that's where my being very jaded comes in, where I say this will happen when they figure out how to replace the tax money that they are now getting from us because they treat us as drug dealers. They don't allow us to deduct all of our business expenses. And so any legislation that you see moving out there, if you look closely, you'll see it has a tax amount in it, what they're going to do. And that will drive it. That and the state saying, we're going to make a treaty between us where we can cross state lines regionally, which they've begun to do in meetings. They haven't done, they're kind of like setting it up like the minute we can move, we're going to.
Hmm.
Something is going, it's really business that will push it instead of common sense
Interesting.
or medical need,
Okay.
I think. And I think
And
at this point, medical necessity is understood, just not in detail.
okay. So let's talk about the medical use. And Alan, can you tell us about the potential benefits? I think, people have in their mind for years and years that cannabis was beneficial for patients with chemotherapy and glaucoma, but not for wellness and not for chronic pain or other things. So can you tell us about some of the potential uses for people?
Sure. And tying this back to the science, back then, even the molecule of THC was not really discovered until the 80s. So a lot of the clinical research and scientific research that is done is more recent. So what we're finding now is that all mammals, not even just humans, have an endocannabinoid system, which is a network of receptors that reacts to cannabinoids. And so phytocannabinoids are produced by the plant. We have endocannabinoids that are produced within our own bodies, such as the anandamide, which is known as the bliss molecule. And so, finding all these therapeutic implications, it's amazing because this plant touches all different physiological symptoms. And really, the question is, how does it do that, right? It's because this network of receptors touches the periphery, it touches the sensory system. It goes above and beyond what we fully can even comprehend, because not only is it targeting these receptors, cannabidiol, CBD, which is usually used for epileptic seizures, also has therapeutic use, but it binds to multiple different receptors. So things like that we're still discovering. As far as on the ground level, at the end of the day, if a patient comes up to me and says that they're using cannabis to help them with sleep, and they prefer to use that over an Ambien or benzodiazepine of some sort, like who am I to tell them otherwise, right? One of
Right.
the strangest things that I've had to learn in my pharmacy career is like whenever there's an issue, the first reaction that a physician has is to always add on medication, increase the dose. It was never to take a look back and think, okay, how can I solve this problem holistically? And so this plant offers a solution. I'm not about the pills over or plants over pills because there is a time and a place for pills and traditional pharmaceutical medication. If people are finding natural relief for things like anxiety, appetite stimulation, all the way to more of the severe muscular diseases, that is what we're here to support them with. And so having an educated conversation, being conscious about things like dose and the pharmacokinetics of the dosage form. All of that ties into what is best for the patient. Cannabis in healthcare is very individualized, and it really takes that hand-holding to make sure they hit their goals and their kind of intentions of why they're consuming cannabis to begin with.
So I'm gonna ask Angela this question. What are the barriers still? Do you think that cannabis use is still impacted and held back by societal stereotypes? Why is this not accepted, or what is the hesitation? And what are some of the ways that we can overcome that?
That's a great question. And it is a really complex answer. And that has to do with a history that really has intentionally limited some of the access to information. So we have thousands of years of evidence, anecdotal evidence. However, that is not, it's been disregarded over and over again. And when you start to unpack that history, the very first US pharmacopoeia comes out in the mid 1800s. And that pharmacopoeia, just like the many others that have come out of other countries before that for hundreds of years, this is just a regular old plant medicine, like just plant medicine. Aspirin is something that we're all familiar with, but aspirin, when it comes down to it, is plant medicine. It's patented plant medicine. So you have over and over again evidence of usage, and this was in every doctor, healer, apothecary. This was in their toolkit. And, there was evidence that supported the fact that this was highly effective with little side effect, other than potentially this one psychoactive cannabinoid, the most famous one, THC. And then that wasn't necessarily much of the conversation. And from there, we see this being pulled out of the US pharmacopoeia by the 1940s. And in that time, there had been a real association with Black and brown people and this plant. And as, America really starts to, continue to develop, that association means that implementing laws about it, and the laws didn't start with criminality. It really started with taxation, because the plant, it's called weed for a reason. It's a very hardy plant. It grows in 6 of the 7 continents. So when you have a means to control for a substance that fundamentally allows people to think differently. This is what it comes down to. And so my focus at Stockton and in public cannabis education initiatives is really to help people understand that one psychoactive cannabinoid, THC, and the 120, 130 others that don't get talked about as much, but should be, and we should be farther along with research, that allows someone to enter an altered state. And that altered state means that you might think differently. You might imagine a different life. You might not be okay with the status quo. And for years, we can look at 900 years ago, we can look at 600 years ago, we can look at 300 years ago. It's always the same. That control and authority really doesn't care for that and wants to limit access to it. And you see beyond the United States, but globally, instances of this. And cannabis history becomes really fascinating when more global concern about opium usage rises in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And the war on drugs starts at that point. And then cannabis is slowly folded in, and the real death knell for cannabis as plant medicine occurs in 1937. And that was the Marijuana Tax Act. That wasn't criminalizing the plant, but it was putting extra duty, burden, and money on those that wanted to utilize it. And at the time, it just happens to coincide with patent medicine being more accessible and more profitable. And since then, we have seen the government double down on the association with criminality and immoral behavior. And that really, in the 1970 Controlled Substance Act, you have real public shifting, and also some legislative acts in the 50s and 60s. But that 1970 CSA is still what governs today, which is why cannabis is labeled a Schedule 1 substance that sits alongside, heroin and LSD, while Schedule 2 is where fentanyl, cocaine, methamphetamines, they all sit. And that Schedule 1 classification really stops research and continues to reinforce that problematic stigma and behavior, that mindset that occurs when we think about cannabis, and we really become very far from associating it with plant medicine. So I hope I answered your question.
So you actually gave me another question to ask. And you said that, until like the 1930s, cannabis was in a healthcare providers in their toolbox as something they could use. And it was cut off. Were there other natural plant remedies that were also treated the same way, or was it only cannabis?
It was really a focus on cannabis. And actually in New Jersey, as of 1886 in New Jersey, an act to regulate the practice of pharmacy, which is passed by New Jersey lawmakers, identifies a variety of substances used for treating patients and increasing comfort and alleviating pain. And that included Indian hemp, which was another word for cannabis.
Wow.
So this was just standard, and and then, opium and heroin is its own. We don't even have time to get into that discussion today. But much of that history became very intertwined, and the association with heroin, cocaine, and marijuana over and over and over again. And marijuana was a word that pops up in the 1800s in Mexico and then is brought and really research indicates that it was a very strategic marketing plan by those in authority to remove the word cannabis from the vernacular and replace it with the word marijuana because it sounds more ethnic.
Speaking of stigma, it seems that cannabis use now among younger people is generally accepted. The stigma is gone. People use it for anxiety, to sleep. They're much more open to it. But Marianne, could you tell us the negative images, where are they coming from with older adults and using it? Is this just flat out ageism that younger people are open to it or can use it, but at a certain age, you're just not allowed to use it or not supposed to use it anymore?
Seniors are the fastest growing category of customers.
Right.
Part of that is because, as I said earlier, who doesn't know a senior who doesn't suffer from pain, appetite problems, or sleep problems? It's not, we don't have education coming their way. And the education, I'm actually not sure about, where the cutoff is. But I've had younger colleagues tell me that they were part of the DARE education program, and they never touched it. Now, my generation, we definitely touched it. We tried it, and we found it useful in some cases after a while. After people started aging, they started finding cannabis helped them. It wasn't just recreational. And right now, I don't know anyone who just uses cannabis recreationally. They may go to the adult use cannabis store as opposed to going to their doctor and getting a prescription, but they're looking for products that have health benefits. And they'll ask for something that'll pep me up or that'll relax me,
Right.
help me sleep. There's products that are now beginning to be formulated with a combination of cannabinoids and terpenes, other substances that are natural from the plant typically, in order to get certain effects, like use this one if you want to go to sleep. But if you'd rather be alert and creative, use this one.
Mhm.
And those products, I think, are a good tool to begin to educate people. Just their existence
Mhm.
is something that begins to educate them. I'm seeing little commercials, but they're commercials that are hidden. They pop up on my phone when I'm playing Scrabble, and they're only late at night because you can only advertise where you can guarantee that the audience is adult. Okay. I think we have neglected educating people in nursing homes, in senior um, communities. And Angela, I don't know whether my experience is true, but when we pull a group out, go to a community and say we're going to talk about cannabis, I think we get at least 50% seniors, if not more. They're the ones who are looking for the information, but many of their doctors do not have it and are reluctant to talk to them about it in any detail. I mean, the doctors are allowed to talk about cannabis. They're allowed to recommend their patient try cannabis. They're just not allowed to tell them where to get it or what to get.
But if it was a prescription for a sleep aid, they
Right.
can write
They
and tell them exactly where to go.
right.
So, I mean, we talked about stereotypes, we've talked about outdated information, and we've talked about lack of education. Um, so I wanted to ask each of you, in your view, what are some of the effective communications or education techniques that you suggest for healthcare providers and community leaders to better support older adults who are interested in cannabis use? How can we get accurate, updated, timely information to them? Marianne, do you want to go first?
Yeah, yeah. My view of that is that it has to be fairly individualized
Okay.
for the patient. And here's where I'm going to give you my experience working with aging parents. Um, my parents lived in California for most of their lives. I'm in New Jersey. And when they hit their 80s, 90s, there began to be a series of medical issues, and that I was going back and forth regularly. Do have a younger brother out who lived near them. And we hired home health aides for them. At the end, they had 7 by 24 home health aides. Um, so they would work with us and with any doctor's orders. My dad developed dementia. And I want to expand on what I just say individualized is actually got to be family oriented.
Okay.
Okay. Because my dad was not going to say, hey, maybe cannabis would help me.
Mm.
He was not understanding much about his condition. He was
Right.
frustrated with it. Where it was really terribly hard was on my mom. She just lost, her partner of almost 70 years. And he's become very difficult. The loving parts of him are gone, and he can't really handle himself anymore. And watching this, I consulted my nurses and I said, do you think maybe cannabis would help dad bring down the agitation level, make him more peaceful, able to focus more? And they said, yes, but go very low dose because at his age, if you gave him 5 milligrams the night before, it would carry him through the whole next day because
Okay.
his metabolism is slow at this age. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So, what do you get for a 90-year-old man
Right.
that's going to work here? Well, gummies are not really his part of his growing up. It'll work with future generations, but like, what's a gummy? So I'm looking for like a butterscotch. That's the holy grail. He doesn't like chocolates. That's another problem. So I find hard candies 5 milligrams each. And I get a small box, because you can only have up to 20 in a box. That's it. And for 20 days, we saw a miracle.
What were the differences you saw?
The next day, my dad suggested that he and mom go watch a ballet in the recreation room. Now, I went down because we have to take them down anyway. And I'm looking for both parents to be dead asleep and this not to be a fun date at all. And there are people nodding off all over the room. And here's dad reaching over and taking mom's hand.
Wow.
And then watched it. And she turned to me and just started crying. And that was wonderful. And I could never find that product again. And I lived in New Jersey. So experimenting with other products was going to be a problem. Mom couldn't really handle it. She understood what we were doing, but it's something that, at this point, they're having their medications laid out for them.
Right. Yeah.
They're not really fully capable of keeping track of stuff. So I'm going to finish this by saying in New Jersey, in the latest legislation that was passed on the medical program, they created a category of institutional caregiver who could be licensed to provide cannabis support to the institution and the people in it, as opposed to just one patient.
Interesting.
And I just talked to Ken Wolski recently, for the medical cannabis program. He was testifying and he was asking about it. I'm going to ask about it too, because we don't have resources here in New Jersey to do that either.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that story. That's really, really powerful. Now, I'm not going to expect that anybody can meet or top that story, but do you have suggestions and examples of what we need to do to make a change here? Angela, do you want to take that first?
Sure. And Marianne's story is touching and just says so much about cannabis. And I would venture to say that all of us on this panel, dozens, maybe even hundreds of stories like that, where I think that's what motivates us to want to work so hard to provide accurate and reliable information. And what I have found, more specifically in my public cannabis education work, is that going into every interaction, understanding that it is a conversation, has to be that touchstone. And when I say conversation, if you are, a senior and you have heard for the majority of your life that this plant is dangerous, that this plant will harm you, and it wasn't always so overt. I do a lot of messaging analysis and research about media and the different sources where we got information. And the reality is that those media sources and DARE and, the youth pastor and schools and health practitioners, they all, mostly, I'm not going to say all, but they were speaking from a place of wanting to protect. Everybody has thought for a long time that they're doing the right thing by furthering this narrative that really asserts that this plant is the gateway to bad things. And in fact, I talk a lot about the gateway drug theory because there was a real gateway drug. Dr. Denise Kandel identified that drug, and it was not marijuana. She actually, in the 70s, with government-funded research, cited that it was tobacco first and alcohol second, and that those were the things that were more accessible. This was misappropriated. And once it caught hold, it spread like wildfire. And then this all became part of all of the messaging that was happening. And when you're trying to help someone understand that that what they have been told about this plant medicine has not been accurate, reliable, or backed by hard data, there has to be a willingness to hear what those barriers are, and really listen and address those on an individualized, or as Marianne was saying, in that family unit or that community
Right.
unit. Because if it feels like it's all one-sided and you're starting the conversation with consumption, you're not going to get very far because the head and the heart are at odds with each other.
Right.
And I see this in particular, and there's data that indicates that the older you are, the more conservative you are, the more religious you are. This is all according to Pew. The likelier you are to not want to accept or process accurate information until. But what I have found, the magic, the secret potion, is that conversation leads to exploring all of this contextual things, which is why so much of my work focuses on history. And it allows for something that I have come to refer to as the concession factor. Because if you have believed one thing for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 decades, then that means that you need something else to sink your teeth into to back off of this ill-informed misinformation, and then be able to accept the fact that there is data. And even if you can't talk to your healthcare practitioner about it, because they don't know, there are other resources. And that's, to me, that's, change happens at the speed of trust. And when it comes down to it, the education part and a lot of that context needs to be part of the conversation. And it does need to be an actual dialogue, not a one-sided sales pitch when it comes to some like operators.
Interesting. Alan, do you have anything that you want to add to that or any suggestions?
Yeah, to Angela's point, it's all about just having an open dialogue and open line of communication. That's the key, right? When I come across someone who is a very big prohibitionist, where they're just shouting in your face like it's the devil's lettuce and all these narratives that were fed to them, I kind of just sit down and challenge them. Like, why do you believe this? Like, in what sense? It's not my job to convince them to think otherwise, because some people, no matter how loudly you shout it to the mountains, they're not going to believe you anyway. They're going to continue living their life and exactly the same way every single day. So it's more about empowering them. It's about showing them it's about empathy, and that's really what healthcare is at the end of the day. So our ability to change minds comes from leading with examples. So if they are nothing has a better influence than a personal testimony like Marianne just gave, right? Like the stories like that are what inspire me and what motivate me to get into the industry and continue moving those along so other people can tell their stories. And it's a real grassroots movement. And that's the whole cannabis industry, where because of decades of misinformation and sheltered, shrouded by political biases, we are crafting our own story, and unlike any other industry out there, the ability for you and I and anyone to participate in it is still readily available. So that's the most exciting part. But to get people on board, honestly, it's just having conversation, open dialogue, educated dialogue, and just having a willingness to think outside the box, essentially.
Okay. And Anna, you started us off. Do you want to close us out with your suggestions for how to move the needle on this?
Sure. I have in agreement with everybody here. I think personal stories go a long way. For example, when I told my parents that I was going to do a PhD looking at cannabis genetics, shock and horror. Oh my God, drugs. You're going to be doing drugs. No, it's a plant. First and foremost, it's a plant, and I'm going to study the plant. And as I got more and more into it, I had more and more conversations about really cool stuff about how prohibition came about, how, how many different strains there are. What do they all do? What are the phytochemicals? What are the medicinal benefits? How do people use it? It's not about just smoking. And especially for, my parents are getting into their 80s. I'm aging myself probably there too. But, yes, they were very closed off and didn't want to have anything to do with it. They are from Tasmania, which is the small island off of the coast of Australia. They did not have the exposure in the 60s and 70s that Mary Ann was talking about. So they led very sheltered lives, didn't even know what cannabis smelled like. When they came to visit me, I was like, do you want to go to a dispensary and just look? Like, we don't have to buy anything, but like, do you want to go check it out? Like, just to see. And I took them to one of the dispensaries in Colorado near where I lived. And it was one of those dispensaries that had the glass up behind the counter. You could see the plants growing. You could see them like doing their thing under the breeze. And then, they had all of the products. And in Colorado, it's deli style, which means you get to see it and you can smell it and all of that before you purchase anything. So they thought that was really cool. And then we did end up purchasing a topical salve, which was basically just coconut oil and then a cannabis plant full extract, which my dad took back to Uruguay, and he's like, this stuff is great. He has really, really, really bad knees to the point where he almost can't walk. And he loved it. He's like, can you get me more of that stuff? Where can I get this in Uruguay? And I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know if you can get it in Uruguay. So yeah. And then, that topical, that's not smoking drugs, right? That's
Right,
just
right.
rubbing some stuff on your skin. And then the next exposure that they had to, you know, other cannabis products was tinctures. I don't want to smoke anything regardless of what it is, but I started taking a CBD tincture just because I kind of thought, well, if I'm going to be a cannabis researcher, should kind of, consume and see what it's all about. And so for like a month, I was taking a tincture that was produced by a local small business and noticed things like my arthritis, like my shoulders and my hips and my knees and my ankles stopped hurting. My fingers stopped hurting. And I was like, wow, it could just be coincidental. But, my mom's had her shoulders and both hips replaced because of arthritis. And I'm like, this is kind of cool because nobody wants to have those kinds of surgeries.
Right.
I still use a CBD tincture most nights before bed, and I still don't have any arthritis problems. So I am going to attribute that to the CBD tincture that I have been taking for, probably 8 years or more now. And I think that y people have this idea, like Angela has said, of what cannabis use is, but
Mhm.
there's so many other ways that you can deliver these really important chemicals that our bodies need, that our endocannabinoid system needs, and that can use to reduce inflammation and sort of repair things that are not working or not functioning correctly in our bodies. You don't just have to, smoke. And for older people, that's actually sometimes very difficult. A lot of people with arthritis, like, how are you supposed to light a lighter and, grind up the flower like you're supposed taking a gummy or a hard candy or rubbing lotion? Those are all things that they're doing anyway. Taking something orally is very easy to do. So
They're doing it, but with other
yeah,
substances
yeah. And
for the
so
same
having
health
these
problem.
Yeah, and having these other delivery methods available and letting them know, like, you don't have to smoke it. And a lot of, yeah, that's not the only way. And just having them see a difference either in somebody that they know or trying something that's not terribly scary, like a lotion or a salve or a patch. And then letting them see the difference that it does make is I think is really powerful. And then the mind starts to open up a little more about, okay, so this seems like it's not so scary and it was really beneficial. What else is out there?
Wow. This has really been educational and enlightening. And what you were just saying, those are all things that people do anyway. They take medications, they have patches for pain, they have lotions just with different substances. So this can be such a similar treatment option, something that they're used to, that they know how to do themselves, that they can take on a regular basis. And I think it's really important to, like you all said, to educate, to overcome these stereotypes, and to let people know what the accurate information is. I want to thank all of you for being here today. This has been a great discussion, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us. I want to thank our guests for joining us today. This has been a very interesting discussion. You can see this and all of our episodes of Aging Insights on our website, www.njaaw.org, and go to the Aging Insights tab.